All right, so 1864, a year that really, I think, flipped the script on the Civil War. Everything's kind of coming to a head, the desperation, the new technologies.
Yeah, I mean, 1864, you really start to see the changing face of warfare,
Yeah.
like trench warfare starting to come into play, technology changing things. Really fascinating year.
Okay, so let's jump into it. First, we've got the Siege of Petersburg. Now, I know you're thinking, another siege, that's going to be a snoozer. But hold on, this one's got a twist.
Oh, yeah, this one is wild. Picture this. You got Union soldiers, a lot of them former coal miners, digging under the Confederate lines. And we're not talking about a little hole in the ground. This tunnel was longer than a football field.
586 feet, can you imagine? It's like trying to dig your way out of Alcatraz with a spoon.
Exactly. And it was all part of a plan, a desperate plan to break this stalemate at Petersburg. General Ambrose Burnside was behind it all. He was really looking for redemption after that whole Fredericksburg mess.
Yeah. Yeah, talk about pressure. So they fill this tunnel up with 8,000 pounds of black powder, enough to blow a hole in the earth you could drive a wagon through.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly what happened. July 30th, 1864, this massive explosion rips a crater 170 feet long, 30 feet deep. I mean, that's like a whole city block just gone.
Insane. I mean, I can't even imagine what it must have been like to see that. But of course, as we all know, in war, nothing ever really goes according to plan. And the Battle of the Crater was, well, a perfect example.
Yeah, the original plan was to have black troops lead the charge. They had been training for this mission specifically. They knew the terrain. They had been drilling for weeks on how to use the chaos of the explosion to their advantage.
But then, last minute, General Meade, he gets cold feet, worried about the political fallout of having black troops in such a critical role, so he changes the plan.
Big mistake. The white troops who went in, they weren't prepared for what they saw. Hesitated, got trapped in the crater. Total chaos.
Oh man, I can't even imagine. They're expecting this clear path, to the enemy lines, and instead they're met with this giant crater filled with smoke, debris, the explosion still ringing in their ears.
It was not good. A huge tactical blunder. And the worst part, the black troops who were supposed to lead the charge, they weren't allowed in until hours later.
And even then, even when they were finally allowed to fight, they were incredibly brave, incredibly effective, but he was too late. The Confederates, they had time to regroup, and that crater, it just became a death trap.
There's this quote from Major William H. Powell. He commanded one of the black regiments. He said that if they had been allowed to lead the charge as planned, they could have reached Cemetery Hill before the Confederates even knew what hit them. A huge missed opportunity, maybe even, could have changed the course of the war.
Yeah, just heartbreaking to think about, really. Shows you the prejudice and the missed opportunities that marked, this whole conflict. But the Battle of the Crater also, reveals this other grim reality of the war, the Confederate policy of killing black soldiers instead of taking them prisoner.
Oh, yeah. There are so many accounts of black soldiers being executed even after they surrendered. One story that really sticks with me is about Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Weld. He was hiding with the black soldier after the battle. And when they came out to surrender, a Confederate soldier shouted, "Shoot him, but don't kill the white man."
I mean, it just goes to show the level of racial hatred that was fueling this war. The Battle of the Crater was a defeat for the Union, tactically and morally, and the loss of life, immense. Grant himself, he saw it as a squandered opportunity, a chance to maybe shorten the war, just wasted.
All right, well, from the trenches of Petersburg, let's head down to the Gulf Coast. Things are heating up in Mobile Bay, the Confederacy's last major port on the Gulf, a prime target for the Union Navy.
And leading the charge, we've got Admiral David Farragut, a Southerner, but fiercely loyal to the Union. He's facing a tough challenge, capturing Mobile Bay, heavily fortified, guarded by two powerful forts, Fort Gaines and Fort Morgan.
And if that wasn't enough, the Confederates had a new weapon, and a pretty terrifying one. Torpedoes. Now, these weren't the self-propelled torpedoes we think of today. They were more like mines, anchored to the seabed, designed to explode when a ship hit them.
Talk about a high-stakes game of naval chess. Farragut knew the risks, but he was determined to attack. He leads his fleet into the bay under heavy fire from the forts, navigating this narrow passage, and then disaster.
The USS Tecumseh, one of the leading ironclads in the Union fleet, hits a torpedo and sinks almost instantly. Almost the entire crew, 114 men, gone.
Ironclads, by the way, they were these new warships covered in thick iron plates. They were supposed to be, much tougher than the traditional wooden ships. But as the Tecumseh showed, even these iron behemoths were vulnerable to these underwater mines.
Yeah, and the sinking of the Tecumseh, it threw the Union fleet into chaos. Some of the ships, they started to hesitate, scared of meeting the same fate. It was a real test of leadership. Can Farragut rally his men?
And Farragut, he steps up. I mean, his order, it's legendary. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. It just captures his whole spirit, his determination. He refuses to let fear paralyze his fleet. He pushes forward, leading the charge straight into the heart of the Confederate defenses.
And he's not just shouting orders from the safety of his flagship. No, Farragut climbs the rigging of the USS Hartford to get a better view of the battle. Enemy fire whizzing all around him.
Talk about leading by example. And his courage, it inspires his men. They fight back with renewed vigor, and they eventually overwhelm the Confederate defenses.
The battle rages on, close quarters combat with Confederate ships, including the ironclad CSS Tennessee. This thing was a beast designed to ram and sink enemy ships. It takes multiple hits, but in the end, it's overwhelmed by the Union fleet.
And when the Union sailors boarded the captured Tennessee, well, the scene was gruesome. The deck was covered in dead and wounded Confederate sailors. Just shows the ferocity of the fighting.
It was a decisive victory for the Union. Mobile Bay essentially closed off, a big blow to the Confederate war effort. This victory, along with Sherman taking Atlanta that same year, well, it really helped Lincoln get reelected. Farragut's daring and his skill, it had an impact way beyond the battlefield.
All right, so from the high seas, let's head inland to Missouri, where another kind of war is being fought. A brutal and often overlooked aspect of the Civil War. Guerrilla warfare.
Yeah, a war fought not on those big battlefields, but in the shadows. Ambushes, raids, reprisals. In Missouri, the line between soldier and civilian, it was blurred, and the conflict there was especially savage.
And to really understand the savagery that unfolded in Missouri, you have to understand the context. Missouri was a border state, deeply divided over slavery. It was like a microcosm of the nation's divisions, right? You had pro-Union folks, pro-Confederate folks. Animosity had been building for decades, and when the war broke out, all that tension just exploded.
Right, it wasn't just armies clashing, it was neighbor against neighbor, families torn apart. Imagine living in that kind of environment. Who do you trust? You're constantly afraid of the next raid, the next ambush. The war wasn't something happening far away, it was at your doorstep, threatening your family, your way of life.
Exactly, and it led to these cycles of reprisals and atrocities, both sides committing acts of just unimaginable cruelty. It's a dark chapter in American history, one that often gets overshadowed by the big battles and famous generals.
Yeah, and at the center of this storm was William Bloody Bill Anderson, a bushwhacker leader known for his ruthlessness. He really became a symbol of the brutality of the war in Missouri.
Now, Anderson, he's a complex figure. Driven by this mix of ideology and personal vengeance, he saw himself as a defender of the Southern way of life, but his methods were often, barbaric, leaving a trail of death and destruction wherever he went.
One of the most infamous incidents associated with Anderson is the Centralia Massacre, a chilling example of just how savage this kind of warfare could be.
It started in September of 1864. Anderson's men rob a train carrying Union soldiers who were on their way home on leave. These are unarmed men, totally caught off guard, at the mercy of Anderson's gang.
They're forced off the train, stripped of their uniforms, and lined up for execution. Just cold-blooded murder. It was a combination of rage, opportunism, and I think a very twisted sense of justice.
The massacre was just brutal. Over 100 Union soldiers killed compared to just 3 bushwhackers. It left this scar on the region, a reminder of the horrors that can happen when war spills out of, the conventional battlefields.
And the aftermath was just as grim. Major A. Johnson, leading a Union force trying to track down Anderson, he was lured into an ambush and suffered a devastating defeat. This cycle of violence, it just seemed to have no end.
The war in Missouri, it was a brutal and complex affair. Both sides committed atrocities that later, were often romanticized. It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white. Even in the midst of war, there are shades of gray.
So from the shadows of Missouri, let's head back to the more traditional battlefields of Tennessee. The Confederate Army of Tennessee, under General John Bell Hood, is about to make a desperate gamble.
Hood, a one-legged general, known for his aggressive tactics, he decides to invade Tennessee. a last-ditch effort to turn the tide of the war. Bold move, but incredibly risky.
He was hoping to exploit the divided Union forces in Tennessee, defeat them one by one, then push north into Kentucky, maybe recruit more soldiers there, disrupt Union supply lines. It was a long shot, a Hail Mary pass with the game already slipping away.
But Hood, driven by, I think, a mix of desperation and ambition, he's determined to make this final stand.
So this campaign, it starts with this cat and mouse chase between Hood's army and the Union forces under General Schofield and Thomas. Hood's constantly trying to outmaneuver the Federals, hoping to catch them off guard, exploit their divisions.
But Schofield and Thomas, they were experienced commanders. They knew how to avoid Hood's traps. Time was on their side. The longer they could delay Hood, the better their chances.
The tension, it's just building as these two armies are maneuvering, each one looking for an advantage. And then comes the Battle of Franklin, this bloody clash that essentially seals the fate of Hood's campaign.
Hood, frustrated that he can't trap the Union forces, he decides to launch this frontal assault on a well-defended Union position at Franklin. It was reckless. He ignored the advice of his own generals.
It's hard to say what was going through his mind. Overconfidence, desperation. Maybe he just felt like he had nothing left to lose. But the results were devastating.
The Confederate attack, it was met with a wall of lead and steel. The casualties, they were staggering. Hood's army, decimated. His dream of this triumphant march through Tennessee, it was over.
The fighting at Franklin, it was ferocious. The Confederates, they charged right into the teeth of the Union defenses. And among the dead was General Patrick Cleburne, a brilliant commander, a huge loss for the Confederacy.
The Confederate soldiers who survived, they were bitter, resentful towards Hood. They saw him as a reckless gambler who would sacrifice their lives for his own ambition. There's this quote from one soldier, Samuel T. Foster, who wrote in his journal that the cries of the widows and orphans at Franklin would heat up the fires of the bottomless pit to burn the soul of General J.B. Hood.
It was a turning point in the war, a moment that really extinguished any remaining hope of a Confederate victory in the West. Hood's army, shattered, demoralized, retreats to Mississippi. The Battle of Franklin was tragic but decisive. It marked the end of a desperate gamble that cost thousands of lives and brought the Confederacy one step closer to defeat.
So Hood's gamble in Tennessee has failed. But the war is far from over. And in our next deep dive, we'll explore the final months of this brutal conflict and the lasting legacies it left behind.
You know, it's amazing to think about Hood's mindset after Franklin. Just led his men into a bloodbath, devastating losses, and he still thinks he can salvage this campaign.
I guess he just couldn't face reality. He was a fighter, sure, but sometimes you got to know when to quit. He chases Schofield and Thomas to Nashville. But his army, they were in no shape for another attack.
Outnumbered, outgunned, his forces depleted and demoralized. His best option was to dig in, wait for the Union to attack, maybe inflict enough casualties to escape with what was left of his army.
So, December 1864. He's camped outside Nashville waiting for the Union to attack. Seems inevitable, right? But then, something unexpected. General Thomas, the Union commander, he hesitates. This isn't the Rock of Chickamauga everyone knows. What's going on?
It's not weakness or indecision, not Thomas. He was methodical, cautious, more like a chess player on the battlefield, didn't want to rush into anything.
So while Hood's sitting there, getting more desperate by the day, Thomas takes his time, reorganizes his forces, brings up supplies, waits for the perfect moment to strike. Unless I'm driving Hood crazy.
Oh, absolutely. The Union Army right there, but untouchable. Every day that passed, Hood's situation got worse. Supplies running low, winter setting in, morale plummeting.
He'd basically become a prisoner of his own bad strategy.
Yeah.
A classic case of overreaching, underestimating your opponent. So what happens when Thomas finally makes his move?
2 long weeks of waiting. Then December 15th, Thomas launches this massive assault on Hood's lines. The Union Army, reinforced, re-energized, attacks on 2 fronts, completely outflanks the Confederates.
Oh, man. I can only imagine the chaos, the carnage, especially for those Confederate soldiers who had already been through so much.
It was a rout. Confederates, outnumbered and outgunned, just swept aside. Hood's army, already teetering on the edge, completely collapses, retreats in chaos. A decisive victory for the Union, a crushing defeat for the Confederacy in the West.
And amidst all the chaos at Nashville, there's something else. 2 Black Brigades played a key role in the Union victory.
They fought with incredible courage, distinction, really proved their valor, their commitment to the Union, a real testament to how the war's meaning was changing.
Absolutely. What started as a war to preserve the Union was becoming a war to end slavery. These black soldiers, they were fighting for their own freedom. And their contributions at Nashville and throughout the war, they were crucial to the Union victory.
When the smoke cleared at Nashville, it was clear the Confederacy was on its last legs. Hood's army, once this proud force threatening the heart of the Union, was finished.
Hood retreats south with what's left of his army, a broken man leading a broken army. His gamble had failed. And with it, the Confederacy's hopes in the West. The Battle of Nashville, it pretty much ended major fighting in the Western theater, paved the way for the final campaigns that would bring the war to a close.
Speaking of final campaigns, let's shift our focus back to Virginia, back to the trenches of Petersburg. This siege, it dragged on for 9 months, just a brutal example of trench warfare.
Petersburg, it doesn't get the same attention as those big battles like Gettysburg, Antietam, but it was a turning point, a war of attrition,
Yeah.
Just grinding away at each other's strength and will. I can't imagine the conditions, the constant threat of enemy fire, disease, hunger, just the exhaustion. It must have been hell on earth.
It was a far cry from those early days of the war when everyone had these romantic notions of glory and quick victories. Petersburg was just mud, blood, and the slow, grinding reality of attrition.
And this is where the Union's resources really started to make a difference, right? They could just keep throwing men and material at the problem, something the Confederacy just couldn't match.
Exactly. Confederates, they're running out of everything, men, supplies, they're stretched to the breaking point. And they fought hard, don't get me wrong, repelled attacks, launched counteroffensives. Shows their resilience, but it's also just tragic, the futility of their cause.
As the siege dragged on, it was clear the end was coming. The relentless Union pressure, the growing problems in the South, it was just a matter of time. Was there like one moment that signaled the end was near?
Months of this bloody stalemate, and then April 2nd, 1865, Grant launches a massive assault, breaks through the weakened Confederate lines. It was the beginning of the end.
Petersburg falls, then Richmond, the Confederate capital, just a week later. Lee's army, exhausted, outnumbered, forced to retreat. Grant's right on their heels. It's amazing to think 4 long years, the war that tore the nation apart, finally coming to an end.
It's a sobering thought, to consider the cost, the lives lost, the families shattered, the scars that lasted for generations. It's important to remember that history, it's not just dates and battles.
It's about people. People caught up in these events, making decisions, facing the triumphs and horrors of war. And it's a story that still resonates with us today as we deal with its legacies, its impact on American society.
And that's why it's so important to really dive into these events. It's not just about what happened, but why it happened and what we can learn from it.
Join us for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore the lasting legacies of the Civil War and what it means for us today. So we've been exploring 1864, this pivotal year in the Civil War. And I think it's clear that it was a turning point. Petersburg, Mobile Bay, the guerrilla war in Missouri, Hood's Tennessee campaign. We've seen how the war evolved, how it intensified. But as we kind of move into the final months of the conflict, I think there's a new question that emerges. What were the lasting legacies of this brutal war? And how are they still shaping American society today?
That's a big question. And honestly, it's one that historians are still wrestling with. The Civil War was a turning point, a watershed moment. And its legacies, they're complex, multifaceted. It redefined the nation, reshaped its politics, and it sparked this long and difficult struggle for racial equality.
Okay, so let's try to unpack some of these legacies. First, the most obvious one, the abolition of slavery. The 13th Amendment, passed in 1865. Formally abolished slavery in the United States, ending this centuries-old institution that had been at the heart of the nation's founding and its deepest divisions. And it's important to remember that the road to the 13th Amendment, it was long and bloody. It wasn't just some legal document. It was the culmination of years of struggle, sacrifice, political maneuvering, the courage of enslaved people fighting for their freedom, the dedication of abolitionists who challenged the morality of slavery, and the political calculations of Union leaders who came to see emancipation as a military and political necessity.
And it wasn't just about ending slavery, legally. It was about redefining what it meant to be an American. The Civil War, the Reconstruction era that followed, it forced the nation to confront its own hypocrisy, to start the long and difficult process of building a more inclusive, a more just society.
The Civil War also, fundamentally reshaped the nation's politics. It strengthened the power of the federal government, redefined the relationship between the states and the nation, settled the question of secession once and for all, and really laid the groundwork for the expansion of federal power that we see in the 20th century.
But this expansion of federal power also created new challenges, right? New conflicts. The Reconstruction era, it was a period of just immense political and social upheaval. The nation was struggling to figure out how to integrate formerly enslaved people into society.
And we can't forget the economic legacy of the war. The South, so dependent on slave labor, it was devastated. Its economy was in ruins, infrastructure destroyed, its social order just upended. The North, though, emerged from the war with this booming industrial economy and this newfound sense of national power.
And so you see these economic disparities, playing out in the decades that followed the war. The South struggling to rebuild, while the North continued to industrialize and expand. This economic imbalance, it contributed to regional tensions and really helped shape the political landscape for generations to come.
Right. And, we have to acknowledge that while the Civil War ended slavery, it didn't end racism, didn't end discrimination. The fight for racial equality continued long after the war, and it's a fight that continues to this day. The Civil War settled the question of slavery, but it left behind this legacy of racial inequality that we're still grappling with.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into 1864. The battlefields, the politics, the new technologies, the social upheavals of the time. Is there one key takeaway you'd want our listeners to remember?
I think the most important takeaway is that history, it's not just a bunch of facts and dates, it's a story. A story about people, about choices, and about the consequences of those choices. It's about understanding how complicated the past is and using that understanding to help us navigate the challenges we face today.
And maybe most importantly, it's about recognizing that the legacies of the past, they are still shaping our world today. By understanding the Civil War and its impact, we can better understand the challenges we face as a nation, and we can work towards building a more just and equitable future.
Well said. This has been a great conversation.
Thanks for joining us for this journey through history. Don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more fascinating explorations of the past and its relevance to our lives today. We'll see you next time.